Guys in the chat, please round of applause for Evan Bacon, our speaker today, who is going to speak about the latest developments in React Native and Expo.
Yeah, hey guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be speaking at this meetup and super excited just to be talking about Expo and React Native because there is a ton of things just happening and developing all the time, especially right now, which is just really nice because it feels like it's like every time I check out React Native, it's like it's Christmas time. It's great. So I'm not going to go too deep into what React Native is actually used for. There's a lot of great resources about that. There's actually a really great one by Software Mansion and talks in depth on how React Native works, but I'll kind of summarize really briefly life without React Native. You have iPhone and Android devices. If you want to make a successful app, you need to target both of them because the market is very split and it's growing just more split all the time. And if you want to make an iOS app, you need to use Swift or Objective-C. And with Android, you use Java or Kotlin. And then that often means that if it's a really robust app, you have two separate teams, which don't really communicate. They're kind of in their own silos. And then with React Native, you can just write the app once, and then it binds to this native code, and then it writes to these different platforms. And with tools like React Native for Web, you can also write your app, and it goes to the website. And React Native for Web is also just super good. Twitter's website is written in it, and lots of other websites are being written in it. There's a new website at Facebook that's written in it. So it's definitely a viable solution for all three platforms. So React Native is just a really great tool all around. And that's all I'll say on the, I guess, just to catch people up if they weren't familiar. So I work on Expo. I work at Expo on the Expo tooling, and I also work on React Native by extension. And Expo is kind of like Next.js to React DOM. I guess Expo is to React Native what Next.js or Gatsby are to React DOM. It's like a tool that you use to interface with React Native. In the same way that React DOM, its scope is being a great way to do reconciling and rendering and things like that. It's a library. React Native scope is very similar. And if your scope is more I want to make an app and put it in the store and continuously update it, that's kind of out of scope for React Native. So you would use a higher level tool like a framework like Next or Gatsby or Expo for native. So to actually interface with Expo, you install the CLI, npmi-g, Expo CLI. If you run that, I got this, this is what it looks like when you install a node library, in case you've never done that before. And then you run Expo init. There's a few ways to start an app. Expo init is kind of tried and true. And then there's npx create React Native app, which is super fast. It's under a megabyte, has a bunch of examples. But for today's example, we're just going to use Expo init. If we run that, you pick a name, you pick a template, and most of these templates are just very bare bones. And then it downloads that template, installs all the JavaScript, and sets you up for the project. Now, something that's really nice about Expo projects is that there is no native code in the project when you get started because reasons that we'll get into here in a moment. And wow, this is, I guess I left in the install just in case you guys hadn't seen it before. All right, so when you get started, you've got these three different commands that you can run to interface with your project, which is a little different to web development where you just have yarn dev or yarn start that starts up the dev server and you do some web development. In Expo, you have these three commands. So yarn Android starts your project up. You can run it on Android, yarn iOS on iOS, and then yarn web is a little different. It starts your project up in a Webpack dev server as opposed to a Metro dev server, and then it hosts it in the browser. And so right here, I'm going to CDN and I'm going to use another tool that you could use to start it, which is Expo Start, directly. And then this gives you a terminal UI to interact with the project interactively, which we find is super helpful when you have something that has multiple different running endpoints. So if we run that, we can hit I and it opens it up directly in the iOS simulator. And then if we hit A, it opens it up directly into the Android emulator. I don't know why that just swapped off just now. Let's play that again. So this all opens up. This will like install directly in the simulator. You can also run this on your device if you want. And then I'm going to I open it in VS Code. By the way, this is all filming of like what coding looks like, just because I've my experience with Zoom calls is that things get a little choppy over time. And then you add that with just like live coding. And so here I make some changes and I save them. And then React Native uses fast refresh to instantly update and reflect those updates on your device, which is a technology which is now like coming to the web thanks to the Vercel team. And the reason we can like open these projects directly in the simulator or emulator is because of an app called Expo Go. Now, Expo Go is a reusable React Native runtime in the same way that like Google Chrome is kind of a reusable React DOM runtime. So like you can just kind of open your project in Google Chrome, like your web project, and it will like have all of the native code there to interact with the JavaScript that your project has. So Expo Go is very similar in the sense that like it has all of like React Native just kind of baked in, and then it will download the JavaScript, and we'll like kind of talk about like how that works here in a moment. But you can like open it up, view projects, and it has like this dev menu, which is kind of like inspect element / the URL bar in the browser. And you can check out your profile where you have different projects that you published and maybe your team's projects. And so it's a nice tool for like just being able to get up and get started really quickly. Usually when people say like, does it run with Expo? What they mean is like, does it run with Expo Go, like in this particular environment? So let's actually talk about like what's going on behind the scenes here. So when you start up Expo CLI, it shows you a QR code, and that QR code reflects this, it's like the URL, which is like an exp : URL. Now, like the exp is the URI scheme, and your operating system knows which app can handle that. So if you have Expo Go installed, it knows Expo Go can handle exp : whereas like if you have an HTTP or HTTPS link, then your OS knows like, okay, open this in the browser. So we can scan this with our QR code on our camera and then open it directly in Expo Go. It will load the app, and then it downloads the JavaScript and renders the app. So behind the scenes, what's going on, and like this is kind of like how you can compare it to web a little bit more closely. Essentially, when you open that URL, the Expo Go app makes a GET request to the URL. So just like at / like whatever you sent it. And then the dev server, which you started by doing Expo start, this is like just a basic dev server, similar to like what you get if you ran like next start or like create React apps like start command. And this hosts the Metro bundler. So it will return a manifest file and send that to the client. And you can think of this manifest file kind of like an index.html in the sense that it like points to where JavaScript and assets are and like how the app should like load the app or how the browser should load the app. And so Expo Go is going to scan it until it finds the bundle URL. And you can think of this like the source attribute of the script tag in an index.html. It points to where the rest of the JavaScript is. And then Expo Go makes a GET request to there. And then the server tells Metro Bundler to bundle the code and send it over. And then when it gets that code, it passes it to the JavaScript engine, which effectively renders the app. So I know it kind of like speed run through all that, but in a lot of ways, it's like it's very much just like how we're familiar with web development works. And so it kind of utilizes that same workflow, even though it's very different. Like it doesn't support HTML or CSS. It's all just JavaScript. 1 second. And something else that's really important to note is that this is for development only, so it can't be used as a distribution method due to App Store restrictions. So this is just something that you use to like help get to hello world and get to like developing your app very quickly. So like instead of having to download all of the native code when you do that initial init, and instead of having to compile like all of React Native just to render like text views and images, you can just open it in Expo Go very quickly and then do the native code stuff later when you're like more committed to your project. And to interact with native code, you need native code like already built into Expo Go. So it wouldn't be super useful if it was just all React Native. So we also have the Expo SDK, which is like, we made this around the time that React Native was just like created, because the Expo team has been around like since I think even before React Native, like a little bit before it. And we essentially made the Expo SDK to like add things like camera and location. And here I'll like click through there, like authentication updates, like all of these core things which you probably want in your app just baked in ahead of time. And this is similar to like the browser. But say you want to use the camera in your app, like the native code for that camera is already compiled ahead of time. Like every React Native package has two parts. It has the JavaScript interface and then the native code that it couples to. So it would have something like JavaScript's like take picture async, and then there would be a native version of take picture async, which then like has all the native interface for it. So in your project, all of this native code is applied ahead of time to Expo Go, and you don't have to build it in. And all you have to do is just install a library like Expo Camera, which has the JavaScript binding, and then use that component. So like from a user perspective, it's very easy and like simple to actually get going. Like you don't need to know any native code to get very far into your like native development cycle. But what if you want to use custom native code in your project? Now, this is something that if anyone here is familiar with Expo, has been like kind of the biggest weak point of the entire Expo workflow for a long time, because when you got to the point where you needed custom native code in your project, whether it was like custom URI schemes or like you wanted to see how your app icon looked on the home screen, you could build it for production and then download it, which is like the slowest way to do it, or you could eject your project. And this is similar to like Create React Apps ejecting. And in Create React App, when you eject your project, it's kind of like there's no coming back. Like it's very difficult to return because it makes so many modifications. And Expo had something similar, which in a lot of ways dissuaded people from using it until recently, like the last week or two, when we announced the run commands, which essentially it has like a run command for iOS and a run command for Android. And when you run these commands, you can build the project locally onto your device without having to go through like the Expo Go app or having to like eject your project. So I've got this video of how it plays right here. And in this video, what I'm gonna do is essentially use some native code, which isn't available in Expo Go. So I've got this library React Native Fast image. Over here in Expo Go, you see that it just doesn't run because the native binding is not already in the app. And so what I can do is just do Expo run iOS, and it will generate all of the native code for the project that was hidden kind of away, like what Expo Go would expect it to run. And just zoom through here really quickly. And then it will prompt me for my bundle identifier, and then it will create the native projects, install any of the extra dependencies that it needs, and then it will run the Cocoa pods install on iOS, which is kind of like Node for like Node package manager for iOS projects. And then over here, you can see all of the native code is being compiled, and the dev server starts right up. And then the project loads in this new standalone app. And the image is loaded right here from the custom library that we had added earlier. So if I swap between them, I don't know if you can see behind the zoom window here, but essentially we have like these two separate apps. So you have like this new standalone app, and you can like swap between them. So it's like its own app, and it's a proper application. Essentially what we're doing here is, let me skip through there. Well, so like in order to do this, you do need like one thing which you don't need normally. How do I move this screen back? Here we go. And that is that you need to have like Xcode installed on your computer. So something that's really nice about the Expo Go workflow is that you don't need Xcode. You can just kind of get going right into your project. So you can do like iOS development on Windows or Mac. For this, you do need Xcode installed if you want to do iOS development, and same with Android Studio. Let's see. And we also added like a bunch of things which just make this like really nice, because interfacing with Xcode is kind of a huge pain. It's just like, especially if you're a Node developer, there's so many things that are just like unfamiliar and they're not really all that baked out. So something that really annoyed me outside of this GIF looping right now is like when you had a basic React Native project, it would just like start with 538 error or like warnings and then like a ton of logs. And it's like, if it's like the basic like working project, it should have like 0 warnings. It should only be like warnings relative to your project. So we kind of fixed that by building a custom logger. And with that custom logger, we also did things like we reformatted how the lines print out. So over here, you see that we have like the npm package is printed first, and then it shows the CocoaPod, and then the file name, like the native file name. And what this does is it kind of gives you the ability to, like, as a Node developer, know how to interface with your project. Because before it was like, you would see something like xdev launcher manifest.swift, and it's like, you're not sure, like, because like you didn't write that, like you just write React code. Like, how do I get rid of this file? Like, what is this map to? How do I update this? So now that you can actually see like the node module in the file, like in the log line, you know, like, okay, I just like uninstall this, or I update it, and things like that. So giving you like more insight as a Node developer into how like the native build works, I think is like really powerful. We also did this with warnings and errors. So warnings used to look like that. They were all like stretched out and long. I'm actually gonna replay that real quick. Go over here. So like, you also notice that the caret here is like in the wrong place. This is like common in Xcode builds. The error won't, like, it won't point to the right place. This will be super long. So your terminal screen, if it's not like full width, then everything is gonna wrap and it's gonna make even less sense. And then the warning message over here, it has like things like W format, like the actual like ID code to it. So there's just a lot of stuff that if you're a Node developer and you just want to add like some custom native code to your project, like you don't want to see any of this stuff. So what we did was I wrote a regex, which like parses the warning message, and then it like feeds it into Babel code frame so that it matches the same format that you would expect to see if you were like running Jest tests or Babel tests, or like just like Babel like transpilation, you hit an error. So like essentially all of your errors and warnings just like look the same, no matter like what tool you're interfacing with. And this is really nice because it kind of takes that like cross-platform ideology of React Native, where like you make a view once and then you render it on iOS and Android, and it like applies it to tooling, where it's like you just use like one tool, and then like the warnings are the same across iOS, Android, and web, and things like that. So now like the caret points to the right place. It's much smaller. It's got like the actual like line number information. It shows you like the surrounding code, things like that, which are just like web is so refined and people have like worked on it for so long that we've kind of come to like these like more optimal like solutions. And so bringing that to native, I think, is really powerful. And we also have something called like auto signing. So like when you do run -- device, it will like find your signing credentials on your phone and then like automatically sign your app for your phone. Now, let me explain why this is important. If you are if you're an iOS developer and you plug your phone in, you can't just like build directly onto your phone, which is like what you would hope to do. And that's because you need to like sign your device for development so that like Apple knows that it's okay for you to run that app on your phone. This is not a requirement for Android or for web development, it's just Apple. So we like streamlined this whole process where it's all just like automated. And it's even like the main profile that I'm using here is like bold out because it's like that's the one that I default to using. So it knows that like this is probably the one I want. Generally, this happens if you have like a work account and like your personal account, things like that. And now the way that this works is behind the scenes of Run iOS, we have this like Expo pre-build command. Now pre-build is super magical. Like the way it works is incredible. And it's kind of like what superseded ejecting your project. So if I run Expo pre-build, what it does is it will generate all of the native code for my project, do all the updating, and then synchronize a config. And you can think of this kind of like a bundler, but for native code. And instead of having like this like web output when you do your bundling, you have this iOS and this Android folder as your output. And from here, you can, in the same way that like with a bundler or with node modules or something, you can go into the folder and directly modify the code. But now, like if you rerun the bundler, then you kind of risk losing those manual modifications. But that's like more prevalent in native development, especially with a tool which is like fairly new, which this is. So like you can go in and make all the modifications you want. Then you lose the ability to like do the bundling, or you can like continue to have your code managed where you can just delete the native code and then like have like all of your npm modules managed in the native code managed by your node modules. And this is powered by something called config plugins, which were released in Expo SDK 41, so like the most recent one. And this is kind of like part of this bigger ecosystem in React Native of code generation and linking. We have things like auto linking, which the Expo team made to like help link your installed modules to your native code, just like automatically. Before that, you had to run some command to like ensure that the node modules were all linked up to the project before you built it. And then there's like app delegate swizzling, where some modules require you to add stuff to the app delegate. Now, like you can define things in your module, which just like swizzle those commands upwards. And then things like CocoaPods, which is the iOS dependency manager, and Gradle. Before that, you just had to like copy your project files into the native projects, which was messy because like then if you ran yarn again and like anything changed like even a little bit, then you'd have to like do it again, but it was unclear what changes inside your node modules folder. So this is just like kind of is like a new part which helps add static configuration to this whole set of tools that work together. So this is what a config plugin looks like. It's just like a basic JavaScript function, which takes a config and then exports a config. And you can like make modifications. So this would change the name to like hello world. And then you interact with plugins by adding them to the plugins array of the app.json, which every React Native project has. And like you can add them with node module resolution, or you can add them as like a file reference. And then you can interface with things using modifiers. So a lot of things often need to interact with like the info plist, like maybe add permissions. Like if you install like a camera module, it would need like the camera permission, and without it, your native build would fail. So you can interact with those using modifiers, where it serializes the info plist for the project and then passes it down to every package that needs it. They make their changes and then they write those files to the system, which is just like a faster way of just reading it and writing it every time. So all of the plugins go through a resolver when you run pre-build. It gets all of the JS like plugins, and then it like runs through them all in pre-build. So if you have like a with icon plugin, then it will essentially run through and then it will generate the icon for both iOS and Android, all the different sizes and things like that based off whatever file you input. And then if you have a camera, like with camera type thing, it will like add permissions for iOS. So it would add like the info plist and let's see, it would add like the camera usage and then like changes to the Android manifest. Let me see if I can move this. I can't move the window. And then like if you had a like a with Firebase thing, it would link up the like the Google services files on both platforms. And when all the plugins have been resolved, then the pre-build is complete. And what you're left with is like this iOS and this Android project, which are both very configured and they have like all of their static properties set up and defined. This is really good for just static configuration. Any kind of dynamic configuration should be done like via code changes, just so that you can like work across different languages, things like that. And the alternative to this was like manual installation, which I kind of got into before with the copying the iOS and the Android code over. It's not fun to do, and it just like leads to headaches. But what's really great about that code generation system is that every part is kind of decoupled. They work together very nicely. They're always tested together, but you can like pull different parts of it out. Like if you don't want to use auto linking, you can just remove it and like manually link things. And now other cross-platform systems in the past were all like very coupled together, which was like if any one system didn't work, then the whole thing was kind of unusable. And so what's really nice about this is like you can just not use it if you don't like it or if it doesn't work for you. And then the Expo run Android command, very similar, prompts for a package name, does the Expo pre-build on Android, and then it generates like the project using, or it compiles the project using Gradle and starts the project up on Android. So very quick. And that's kind of like how you would add custom native code to your development project locally. Now, if you wanted to build for production, you can do that same process locally, but then you have to manage code signing yourself, and you have to like synchronize entitlements. You have to just do like a ton of these like weird little, especially on Apple, like Apple things. And then there's also like kind of code signing issue, like I guess it's called key store management on Android. And so we just created this new system called EAS Build, which is like a cloud build service, which is integrated. This kind of the kind of thinking behind this is like when you're doing web development, you just have a tool like Now or Netlify where you just run like one command in your project, and then it like takes that code and it puts it in a place where users can like interact with it. And we kind of wanted to bring that same like feeling to the native ecosystem, where you could just like be a node developer and install a node tool and like run one command and have it available to everyone. So the way this works is you would install the CLI, npmi-g EAS CLI. And then over here in your project, you just do EAS build. And I'm actually gonna step through this really quickly if possible. Okay, well, you can select a platform like iOS or Android, and then it like manages all the signing for those projects, all the entitlement synchronization, and then it sends them up to EAS to be built in the cloud. And then you have like a link to follow it. You can follow it from a dashboard. This is very similar to like something you would see in like web tooling, especially like things like I guess Vercel is one, which is like kind of more connected with the SDK and the like tooling, the cloud services. So in here you can like manage the downloading the file. You can see all the native logs. Again, you can do all this like locally, but it's more of a pain. And what happens when you do this in the cloud is it does two things, because a native, like a React Native build it's kind of like if you were to make a web build where you bundle all your code, and then if you were to also build the browser that you run the code in. So like if you also made Google Chrome at the same time. And that is like, it just like increases complexity by a lot. So the bundler step is done with the Metro bundler, which is React Native's custom bundler, which is tied to React Native. Unlike other web tools, mostly you can only use Metro. There is like kind of more movements to add more bundlers, but right now it's mostly tied to Metro. And it works similar to like Webpack. It's hard to get enthused about Metro. So like it takes all of the code and then it like bundles it together into one big bundle. It does this twice for iOS and another time for Android. And then it puts it into like an output folder with all of the assets and resources. And then the next step after the Xcode build is done is there is a shell script, like it's called like bundle assets and like code and assets. And what that does is it bundles, or it copies your index.js bundle, which is just your index.js. I think the reason for the JS bundle is just like having JS assets in your iOS or Android project is like, it like doesn't work quite the same. So we use JS bundle as like a way to just like be clear that this is your React bundle. And then it will also copy over the assets into your project. And then it also copies another version over to a hosting service. And that is very similar to like when you push your code to like Amplify, AWS, something like that. And this hosting service essentially, like when you open the app on your device, it like pulls the hosting service and then like gets any update and downloads it for use later. And then it like applies it the next time you run it. So here's kind of like what it looks like. So I guess I'll preface this video like, this is an app that I've already installed from the App Store, and I've like opened it. I'm about to open it once, and I've already published a new version of my app like over the air. This is just the JavaScript version. You can't send any native code over the air. And this is like an OTA update. This is like pretty unique to React Native compared to some other like tooling where you can change parts of the UI remotely. So I've pushed a new update, and we're not going to see it when I first open the app. This is my old revision, but in the background, it just downloaded the update. And now the next time I open the app, we are going to be able to actually see like all of the changes applied. So here I just changed the background to like purple, or well, with some like built-in CSS color like lavender. And essentially this most closely resembles the stale while revalidating service worker caching policy, where like it fetches the code on the update like for the next time you run the app. Whereas like in web, if you don't have a service worker, it always just like doesn't have anything cached, and it gets everything from the server each time. The reason we default to this on native is because offline support is a huge reason people like create native apps in the first place, and time to interactive, which is like when you like first touch the app to when you can actually use it, is also super important. So we always default to like just getting things in the background, opening it up the next time. And then after you have your app like created, you want to submit it to the App Store. Otherwise, people can't really use it. So on Android, what you would do is you download the binary file, and then you just kind of drag it and drop it onto the Google Play Store. Let's see if it, there we go. So I've got my binary here, which is an AAB file. It can also be an APK file. Then there's like a lot of good guides. I like this one just because it's like simple and straight to the point. It's also Expo Docs. So right up here, you go to the Google Play Console. To use the Google Play Console, you need to give like a one-time payment, $25. And then you hit Create App, give it an app name. You select if it's like a free app or like a game or an app. And then you agree to some terms and conditions. And then over here, all you have to do is go to the production tab, and then you just hit create new release, continue, and then you drop your binary file right onto the screen. So there's not a lot of continuous automation that you can do for this first round. You can automate it for like subsequent rounds, but the first time you always need to like go on and manually do this process, which is kind of annoying. Then you set the version and then the release notes and you save it. And then after that, you just do like metadata and screenshots, and then you have to go through app review on Android. Now, on iOS, there is actually surprisingly a lot more automation that is possible. It doesn't make it easier, but it is possible. So you can use this tool EAS Submit for iOS the first time, where you run it, you sign in, you select the binary that you want, which in this case, I selected the most recent one that I built with EAS Build, and then it submits it to the App Store. So I don't ever have to like open anything. I just run this like command and it does it. So it's much easier to automate. Like if you had like a pull request and then you merge it to master and then it like sends it off to this app store. It's like much easier to do things like that. And if we go over to the App Store, it creates this new like App Store page entry. So over in App Store Connect.apple, which by the way, this requires a annual payment of $100 to use. So a bit more expensive than the Android one. It creates the app, synchronizes your app name, all the entitlements, the signing, the certificates, the bundle ID, everything like already automatically set up. So like as far as you're concerned, like as a Node developer, you don't even need to like worry about that. You can mostly focus on just the React code. And then it uploads the binary, which you can like do beta testing through TestFlight, or you can just submit directly to the store. But you do have to do all the screenshots yourself and the metadata and go through App Store review, which is not always that fun. But that is like kind of this like full process between like creating an app and then getting it into the store, like getting it essentially into the hands of users. And then like also doing over the air updates and like setting up all the React stuff. So I didn't really go too much into like navigation or animations, just because like in my personal opinion, those parts are like more fun. And like, I think it's like, it's nice that like a lot of work is being done to like help us focus on the things that we like to do as developers. Like I enjoy making animations. I enjoy making like navigation, stuff like that. So I don't enjoy doing certificates or provisioning profiles. So I kind of like all that to be automated. So I kind of went into that today just because it was like most of like where the magic happens. And I think there's a lot of stuff that like doesn't really get discussed too much in React Native. So I think like the next steps for all of these tooling is we kind of have this like this circle of like, if you want to add native code to your project, it's down to like these kind of 4 steps right now, which is like you install a library like YarnAdd, React Native Fast Image, or React Native NFC Manager, and then you pre-build, synchronize, and generate all the native code, or you manually link it. And then you do the native build with Xcode Android Studio, and then you install it on your device somehow. There's like a couple different methods and they all have their different trade-offs. And that's still like 4 steps to like actually like really what you want to do. Like the only step here that's familiar to us as like web developers is just like npm install, like just add the library and then like import it and write the code. So it would be great if we could take these like 3 bottom steps and just like combine them into one continuous singular workflow where like you just install code and then it goes through some step and then you're back to like writing React code. And I think like a really nice way to do this that we see a lot in especially web development is like setting this up in some kind of GitHub action or some GitHub workflow where you open a pull request and then it like has some action which essentially runs all of these steps and then it shows you like, okay, you click here to install it, which is really great because in iOS development, this is just like not a thing. Like you build like one version of your app. And TestFlight, which is like the beta testing service provided by Apple, only supports one version of your app. So like if you want to, for instance, go back like to version 1 of your app when you're on version 46, like you just can't really do that. So like integrating it with Git and stuff like this gives you like this flexibility that we just have with web. Like usually in web, you get like some like hashed out link to your URL and you click on it, it's the preview, and you kind of like interact with it. And like that just leads to all these other more interesting things you can do, like what Next.js just kind of showed with like Next Live, or like what Netlify is doing with their like PR preview things. And bringing that to native, I think, is going to be really exciting. So maybe starting this continuous workflow by committing your code, and then it just like builds it all automatically and gives you like an app to download your code. And this is something that we kind of plan to roll out with the next SDK version, Expo SDK 42, which comes out in a couple of weeks. We release one every quarter, so it'll be the end of the second quarter. And essentially, it gives you like the next closest thing to that App Store experience, where you just download an app, you load your code on it, and then you just get back to writing your React code. And you don't ever really need to focus too much on native code unless you want to. So we're excited to like roll that out in beta and like see how people interact with it, because it is bringing like a lot of very interesting concepts to native. You know, like native is like on iOS, building can be like a simple like 40-step process. And like by the time you do it, you don't really worry too much about like if your bundle was a certain size, like if it was smaller, or if it was like how big it was, just because you're like so happy that it was done. But like when you have this consistency where things are building so quickly, same with web, like you start to wonder like, okay, can I shrink this by like a couple kilobytes? Or like, can I like what's taking so long to build? Things like that. And like bringing those questions into the native development world that we have in the web development world, I think is going to be like super powerful. And that's kind of all I got for today. It was a lot of like in the weeds stuff. I hope like people were able to follow. We will be doing like lots of Q&A. So if people have questions, I'm here. And then also we've got like forums.expo.io, or you could tweet at Expo and like ask questions there as well, and like reply. And I've been Bacon, by the way. So you can find me on the internet at Bacon Bricks. I forgot to mention that because I was just like, oh, let's talk about React Native. Yeah, so I will, should I give the screen back? What do you think?
It's okay. You can keep the screen in case you have to explain something. Guys in the chat, you can, if you have questions, you can either ask them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question directly. We're not a lot of people, so it should be fine. For myself, like I have one question, and every time I talk about React Native and Expo, a lot of people say that there is